what an amazing, what an amazing moment. And I have to thank, before I introduce our amazing speaker, who we just got a brief taste of in the green room, who speaks so poetically, but at the same time deals with things that are deeply technical and scientific. It's amazing that somebody can have such reach and such span. I have to thank Devin. We started with our speaker series with a Formula One world champion to world-renowned actor Glenn Close, and to now move toward our Thanksgiving period to somebody who is somewhat Promethean in terms of bringing fire to humanity, Mr. Bre Pettis. I hesitate to go too long into the introduction because I'm really eager to hear him speak, and we got a little taste of it. But I want to say that, and the arc of his history, that he moved from camera assistant to art teacher to, again, this Promethean innovator who is trying to bring to humanity, literally, he's trying to bring to the breadth of humanity the possibility of shaping and constructing their own destiny. Now, he himself has said that his mission is to make the world a better place, and he's doing it by having people be able to make things and shape things in their own way, and bring this vibrant force of creativity that's been stifled up until now, to bring it to the entire planet. I've skimmed through briefly the Cult of Done manifesto, and this notion of failure and rebuilding, and failure and iteration. It's really quite liberating just to read from somebody who's technologically ignorant like myself. It really is wonderful for anybody who's trying to write or to think. He used this beautiful alliterative phrase of being both brave and broken, and that's how you build companies and new ideas for people. What an honor and what a pleasure to welcome Bre Pettis as our speaker this morning. Bre Pettis.
Hey, thanks, folks. I'm excited to chat with you for a couple reasons. I've got, when I think back to being your age in middle school, I dropped out of middle school. I can tell you that story. And I later became a middle school teacher, which is a little bit of a paradox, right? So I've spent a lot of time with people your age, and I can say, first of all, it's the hardest age to be human. Basically, from like 11 to 14, your body is telling you it's changing a lot, and then socially, you're all you want to do is figure out how to relate to your friends, and then you have all these adults telling you got to do all this stuff or your future's doomed. So it's a really difficult, challenging time to be human, and I applaud you all for just basically surviving it. And I think it's great that you're in a school that is really, from what I understand about it, it's trying to understand who you are as the focus of your future, rather than saying you should be this, you should be that, you need to do this, you need to jump through these hoops. It sounds like you're in a place where people are your colleagues as students, your fellow students, and the adults around you are really curious to see who you will become, and that's great. So starting off there, like, good job being alive as a 11 to 14-year-old these days. I'll give you a little. I think my goal is to give you a little background and then get to Q&A. So I'm going to give you sort of a whip through my life, just as zip, 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 and then I'm sort of going to expect that if something sparkles to you or to more than one of you, that you'll want to hear more, and I can go deep on that. And my goal is to be helpful, and that you can. My hope is that you, if anything, you learn from my story, and hopefully, like, feel less doomed about your future. That's my goal. So I had a relative, so I grew up basically neglected. My dad was a workaholic. My mom was mentally ill. I didn't, when you're young, you don't really know that things aren't good until you're older, and then you reflect on them. So as a young child, I had no idea that I was in a pretty tough situation. And and it just, because it was just normal, right? So about when I was 13, my mom had a mental breakdown, and my family sort of fell apart, and I went to camp. They sent me there for a week, and while I was there, I figured out how to work there, so I didn't have to go home. And I did that for my entire teenage years, where school would get out, and I would take a bus to I lived in Seattle, and I would take a bus to the middle of Washington State, which is literally like, a Western scenario with rolling sage bushes and horses. And I washed dishes all summer to basically stay there. It was great. Um, and I think, I had the you can look at challenges in your life and accept them and move through them. Me and my brother both had different approaches to dealing with sort of our traumatic childhood. He acted out a lot and misbehaved a lot, and I just I read a lot of books. It's sort of was how I coped with it. Um, so I have a memory of being in 7th grade and taking these standardized tests that they make you take, and I aced it, and I didn't get any wrong, and because I wasn't really paying attention in school, they thought I cheated, so they made me take it again, and so I aced it again. And after that, I just had very little interest in school, because they really thought that I was stupid, and I wasn't, and I was just not engaged. So because my family was kind of falling apart, it wasn't hard for me to just stay home and read. Now that's probably better if yeah. So there's that. I also had the benefit of my family started a company in 1981 doing software, which was really early. This is Apple II Plus and Commodore 64 years, which is the most basic form of computing. And I was a nerd. And back then, being a computer nerd meant that, like, I had to fight. Like, kids would be like, nerd, and it was like a real put down. And they'd like tease me, and I'd have to deal with that. So I can so there's that. And then it turns out, like, that's really important in my history, because when people tease you, it hurts, and you remember it, and it allows you to be kind to others who are in a similar situation, right? And stick up for other people later on in your life. So then, let's see, I went to high school, and I basically, when I entered high school, I realized that if I didn't start paying attention and getting good grades, it was going to have an impact on my life, and nobody was going to help me get good grades. So I better do it myself. And so I don't know how I did it, because I never really took home homework, but I got work done during school at lunch, and I got work done. I somehow made it through high school. Pretty grumpy about the whole thing through it. I was grumpy through most of high school. Is probably how I do it. I went to college. I went to a liberal arts college that was a state college that was very affordable, and and it was a college that didn't have grades, and you didn't have any requirements to exit the college except to take a number of how many courses you took. That was great. And the primary way of learning was reading books and talking about them, which I think is great, seminar style learning. After that, I ended up, through family connection, I ended up studying performing arts. And after my work, I had about a month and a half before I graduated. So I decided to make a puppet show. And I created a puppet theater that would fit in the back of my car. And I had a fantasy about driving across the country with a puppet theater and giving performances as I went. And before I left, I ended up, my uncle called me and offered me a job working on a film set on a movie, Pinocchio, with Martin Landau and Jonathan Taylor Thomas. and it was in Prague. And I was pretty naive about the world. And I accepted the job. And he was like, by the way, it's in Prague. And I was like, great, no problem. And then I had to look up what country that was in, which was is the Czech Republic. So I found out I was going to Europe. So basically hustled over there, and then ended up going after that. I worked with a bunch of folks who were from the Jim Henson's Creature Shop, which are that's sort of like at the time in the 90s, that was the coolest place to be in puppetry. And I basically started going there and working until the guy who ran the shop, I basically go there and ask for a friend, they let me in, and then I just go and start being helpful and working. And about 2 weeks in, the guy who ran the place said, Bre, do you work here? And I was like, I do. You just don't pay me yet. And he said, okay. And a couple weeks later, they found they got a new contract to do a movie about gorillas, and I got a gig on that. Very low paid, but it was great. I burnt out on film after about 2 years and went back to Seattle and made very little money for a couple years trying to have my own independent puppet theater, basically doing workshops in schools and squeaking by until I decided, I think I'd always I'd like the idea of working with young people up until then, but been scared of them. So once I worked with them a bunch with the puppetry stuff, I ended up going back to school and getting my teacher certificate and teaching. I taught for 7 years and mostly in middle school. And then basically ended up in Washington State. It was the second lowest paid place to be a teacher. So I really didn't have money for a car, and I wanted to have a family. So I started doing a side hustle. I've been doing side hustles the whole time, trying to make art, because I thought, okay, if I can make, I know I can make things. I have a thing that I like to do is just make stuff. So I thought if I can make beautiful stuff, people will buy it, and then I can have a second income. But nobody really bought anything, or not enough to justify doing that independently. So ended up doing a couple video art projects in 2004 and taking them to galleries, and no galleries wanted to represent me. So I just put them on the internet, and that was pretty successful. Ended up transitioning and basically teaching my classes by video, because if I showed a video of myself teaching, I found that students remembered the instructions with just the first time, whereas if I did it in person, I had to repeat myself 3 or 4 times. So I started publishing those videos to the internet, and that transitioned into a gig for Make Magazine, and ended up getting a job with them making videos every week, where I sort of basically told them I'd do it if they'd pay me, and they said okay. And then I moved to New York because I wanted to be around other people who were doing what I was doing. In Seattle, I was the only video blogger. I was like the 13th video blogger, so I was really early to that, putting video on the internet. This is before YouTube. And in New York, I was able to, New York is such a great place because there's so many people. Instead of being the only person doing video blogging in Seattle, I was one of like 15 people in New York City. And we would get together and hang out every week. And it was just a great community. So I basically went back to Seattle, put everything I owned out on the sidewalk, put 2 bags, and moved to New York, which is a very New York style story. Let's see. After that, I didn't have a workshop. So I created a workshop, a collective called NYC Resistor, to basically share a workshop with a bunch of folks and share tools, so that we could build anything, both because we had the tools and because there were a bunch of different people with, different skill sets, programmers and engineers and all different kinds of folks. So we were able to build stuff, and we ended up building some prototypes of a 3D printer back before people knew what that was. And after about a year of just selling parts, we decided to start a company. And at the beginning, we just thought it would be a side project, but we ended up making 20 3D printer kits, and those sold basically instantly. So we had to go full time, and then that grew kind of crazy big. So within 4 years, that went from being 3 people to 600 employees, and that's a big. That's I think like, okay, I was in charge myself as a kid. As a teacher, I had classes of between 25 and 32 students. And then all of a sudden I was running a very large company where, being a company leader is kind of like being a teacher, except you might have more employees than you have students. So I learned all about that. Ended up taking money for that to fund it. And when you do that, you're obligated to return that money. So we started with $75,000 and ended up taking investment of about $11.2 million and then sold the company for about $400 million. So for my original investors who gave me some money, I gave them 250 times the money they gave me. So one of them gave me $25,000 and I returned him like $5 million. So that was a pretty good investment. And then angels, I gave them about 50 times what they gave me. And my venture capitalists, who are the more, they get involved later when there's less risk. I gave them about 10 times the amount of money they gave me. So when you start a company and you either borrow or accept or sell part of the company, there's like an obligation, kind of a deal with the devil, where you're basically saying, I'm going to take your money, and if I don't give it back and a lot more, my name is mud. So if it's sort of that was stressful. So was really proud of it though, because we built machines that empowered people to unlock their potential and creativity. And then I sort of tried a bunch of different things and failed at them, and then bought a company called Bantam Tools, where we're sort of doing a similar thing to MakerBot, but with CNC machines that with a 3D printer, it builds stuff up. With a CNC, you put a block of stuff in, kind of like a sculptor, it takes it away. And now I live about an hour north of New York City, because property got too expensive in New York City and we couldn't afford to have a company in New York City. So now I'm about an hour north of New York City, and have my company is in Peekskill, New York. Great place. And yeah, I have a daughter who's 9 years old. And there you go. Questions? Let's skip to the good part.
Thank you so much, Bre, for sharing your story. We do have so many questions. Our students have been so excited for you to come today, and they've prepared a lot. So we're going to start with Catherine, who will ask the first question this morning.
Hi, good morning. I would like to thank you for your wonderful talk and for being our whole school time speaker today. And after reading your biography and watching your TED Talk, we can all see your passion and your love for teaching. And I see so much of your same joy in other teachers throughout our world. You mentioned in your TED Talk that when students learn about abstract things, they should also be involved in physical hands-on activities, because it builds connections and real knowledge about what is being taught. I agree. So my question for you is, in what ways can we transform the education system in the United States to encourage this learning model?
Thank you, Catherine. What a great question. I mean, I think that, so like my daughter is dyslexic, and so reading and writing is hard for her. And our educational system is so focused on learning through reading and writing that it's really difficult for her. So, and I think for a lot of students, it's similar. Not everybody's strength is in reading and writing. And so I think the way forward with that, it'd be nice to say like, oh, the system should change. The people who run it will change it. But the reality is adults suck at changing. They're not very good at changing. They're not very good at transforming infrastructure that works, or they think works. And so I think the only way to really transform education to make it more beneficial to students and who they are and who they want to be is the student, as an individual, you have to basically take control. And this is really hard because so many of the voices that you're going to hear are going to tell you, you have to do this, you have to do that, you have to be like this. We expect, you know, some parents even say like, we want you to be a doctor, we want you to be an engineer, we want you to be X, Y, and Z, without really considering who you are. So I think that for most students, when you're in school, if you want to have the best possible experience, you either need to figure out how to get in touch with what you need and somehow get it. And it might not be in school. I found that when I was a teacher, a lot of the best learning happened in after school activities. That's one of my favorite things to do. Is I taught ceramics 2 afternoons a week and after school. And that's where I really got to know my students better, and where I got to really, get to be able to be most supportive. So I would say that there's something about that. I think the other thing that I would say is, you know what? You don't have to figure it out when you're young. I still in many ways feel like I'm just starting to figure out what I should do when I grow up, and I'm 48 years old. So I just keep trying, and I try and throw myself into it. And I've been into a lot of jobs that were not a great fit for me, and in a lot of classes in school and when I was in school that were not a great fit for me. And I just had to get through it and do my best and hope that if nothing else, it's really important to figure out what you don't like and acknowledge that, so that you don't keep doing the things you don't like, right? At least not when you have choices. So, I mean, I started MakerBot when I was 37, and up until then, if you look at it from like a societal perspective in terms of like how much money I made, or different sort of, I decided that I was going to be successful by being who I am, and accepting the consequences. That meant that when I was a puppeteer, I lived on $6,000 a year for like 4 years, which is not fun in the world. Like, it means like you don't get to go out and eat. I mostly ate like rice and beans and salad, and figuring out how to be very frugal, because I wanted what I wanted. I was willing to compromise literally what I ate and how much freedom I had economically to have the freedom to be myself. So hopefully that's helpful. That's a good question, Catherine. I'll take the next one.
Great. All right, let's move on to Zaida.
Hi, my name is Zaida. I'm in the 8th grade, and COVID-19 has shifted the way that schools operate and how education is approached across the entire world. My question for you is, how do you think that your approaches to hands-on learning can continue to be implemented and unlike during a time when so many kids are distant learning?
Zaida, it's so interesting. So when I was a teacher, I was really frustrated with the system. The government was making us give students tests. They were judging the schools based on how well the kids did the tests. They were judging the teachers by how well the kids did the tests, and the tests were not really relevant to the students. So it was very frustrating. I used to joke that one of the best things that could happen to school is that we just stop going to school for 3 years. We figure out what else to do without school that could still be of benefit to our young people. And then at the end of the 3 years, we figure out what worked, and then we redo schools based on what worked. Because like, it's so hard to build a new system when you're in a system. So my idea was like, well, maybe if we just stopped the system for a few years, tried a bunch of experiments, and then redid the system, that would work. Not knowing that this would actually happen in my lifetime, with COVID. Like, schools are essentially really having to figure out some different approaches to make this work and be safe, right? Whether you're in person and you're having to be really distanced and safe, or you're at home and doing school like what we're doing right now. I think that for students who are willing to be brave and feel inside themselves kind of who they are, it's an opportunity for you to get a lot more freedom, frankly, to explore your passions. And when I was growing up, if you wanted to be something, you had to think about going to school to learn how to do it. Well, screw that. If you want to learn how to do something, you can basically go on YouTube and watch people teach it and not have to rely on an institution or other people to learn it. It's still better, I think, to be inspired by people in person, but it's not necessary. So I would say the thing that I'm most excited about, and I really thought it was just going to be a fantasy in my life, is that now there's a real opportunity for young people to explore their passions and their interests. And the obligations of school are changing, and it's an opportunity for young people to explore their passions and interests.
Thank you so much for that, Bre. Our next question is from Yuritsi.
Hi, good morning. I saw in your bio that in 2014 you stepped down as CEO of MakerBot, and now you have started a company called Bre and Co. Can you tell us what the experience of forming your own company was like? What would you say is Bre and Co.'s proudest achievements thus far?
So one of the things that sort of is, so I've got a couple like lines that go through my life, and one is that I like to make things. Another one is that there's things that I sometimes have wanted to make that I can't make by myself. And that's sort of a revolting development for somebody who's very independent, because it means you have to actually work with other people. If you've ever done a group project and done a good chunk of the work yourself for the group, you can probably feel the resistance to working with a bunch of other people, right? And in fact, there's lots of opportunities as an adult to work independently. But there's sometimes where if you want to do something, you have to work with other people. So we started with meditation. One of the things that I'll come back to that actually. I want to put that on. I have something to say about that. But I think in terms of a transition, when I started MakerBot with some co-founders, it was just 3 of us. And by the time it was 600 of us, I didn't know everybody's name. And I didn't have as close, there was a lot of layers of people between me and the product we were making, which wasn't my favorite. So one of the things after I sold MakerBot is I started Bre and Co with the goal of making things that could be in service of friendship. And this actually didn't work that well. I made these beautiful things, ceramics, I made pens, I made things that you would carry with you that would remind you of your friendship. And I set up an infrastructure online where people would give a gift and they would tell a story, sort of like a wedding toast if you've ever been to a wedding, where you really recognize and put a spotlight on how special that person is to you, because that doesn't happen enough in our society, in my opinion. And then I put it out on the internet and nobody did it. It was super depressing. And so the thing that was missing was that I was making things that were just things. And so what made me happy about eventually shifting from Bre and Co into Bantam Tools was, Bantam Tools, we make tools that are not just things, they're tools. The things that people use to make things. So for whatever reason, for me, that seems to work better, because the things that I make that are tools, people buy, whereas the sort of watches and pens and pocket knives and other, and the ceramic stuff that I'd made to be really special craftsmanship things, people didn't buy. Sometimes you just have to accept, you can make the best things and put them out in the world and people don't want them, and you just got to move on.
Thanks, Bre. And our next question comes from Melissa.
Hello, good morning. After reading your biography and watching your TED Talk, I was inspired by your knowledge and advocacy for allowing students to create and build things through hands-on learning. My question for you is, what advice would you give to middle school students who aspire to one day become an engineer or work in a technology field?
To be an engineer or work in a technology field. You know, I think the beauty of the United States of America is that there are so many opportunities, but they're not handed to you on a silver platter, right? So you have to go kind of hunt them down. So if you want to get into technology, it sort of depends on your motivation. If you're getting into it because you think it's good money, you know, that's enough motivation to probably get you through a lot of hurdles. You'll probably go through a lot of, you know, you'll be willing to learn, you know, hard math to be able to get through that, to get to the other side of that, if that's your primary motivation. And that's a lot of people's motivation. I was basically willing to make a trade where I wanted to do things without, and I didn't want to, and I was willing to compromise and not make money to do the things I wanted to do. So when we started MakerBot, we didn't, and when I've done things, I generally don't know, you know, I had some success, but it wasn't intentional. It wasn't intentional to make money. It was more interesting to try and shift the world, to give people this opportunity to manifest things. Because until really 3D printing became a thing, until we made it a thing, when people thought about making products, they thought about having to work with a factory, and you had to think in terms of being able to make a million things to justify the hassle of making something. Whereas, you know, we wanted to change the world by giving people the ability to just make one thing if they wanted, and nobody else had to like it. You just had to want it and make it yourself. So different, like we wanted to make that an option, and that's what drove us. So I think if I was giving advice on getting into technology, I would probably just say start getting it, like, you know, get into it. Figure out, you know, I think there's something about feeling what sparkles inside your soul when you do it, or when you feel the sense of attraction to something. So if you are attracted to general technology, I'd say, I don't know, something feels fishy there. But if you're interested in figuring out how to make games, you know, you could do that by either becoming a programmer, or you could sort of pull a Tom Sawyer approach. He's the one who made painting a fence really fun and he actually charged his friends to give them the opportunity to paint a fence that he had to paint. You could sort of take that sort of approach of, hey, I want to make games. I'm going to find some friends and be the organizing force rather than the programming force. So I'd say sort of like look to both what you naturally sort of like to do, and then what you're attracted to, and figure out ways to make those things connect however you can. And I think if you just do small things every day towards something, you get there. Like if you want to learn Japanese, you don't get it by just, you know, if we could just plug in a USB stick to the back of our head and learn Japanese, that'd be great, but we can't. We have to actually start the process and learn how to learn a few words and then learn a few more, and it's a lot of confusion and frustration. So I think like with anything, if you want to get into it, it's just a matter of moving towards it step by step. Hopefully that's helpful.
That's great advice. Our next question is from Alexa, who has a question about being a teacher.
Hey, good morning. When I was watching your TED Talk, I was really inspired by your passion for making learning empowering for young students, and how it was led you to accomplish in everything that you have done so far. As a former teacher yourself, what do you think is the best thing a teacher can do to empower a student?
I mean, I can just speak from my experience. I had a pretty miserable student experience. There's a few moments and they're just a few moments that really had powerful impact on me. And one of them was when one of my professors in college said something to the effect of, you know, I'm really curious to see what you do after college. I think you're going to do something special. I came back to her later. I'm now friends with her on Facebook, and it's, you know, 30 years later. And I was like, this had a really powerful effect on me. And she didn't remember even saying that. But to me, it was like, wow, somebody recognizes that there might be something special in me. And it's sort of curious to see how it comes out. And that was the first time I'd really gotten that feeling of somebody like thinks that I have potential, right? So I would say I wouldn't wait for schools or teachers or adults to do that for you. I would suggest you just start doing that to the people around you. If you see somebody has an interest, one of your friends, I would just tell them, hey, it looks like you're interested in that thing. That's cool. You might be surprised at just the impact of just saying something simple like that has on someone in your community. You can actually do it to adults too. Because adults are often just as lost as students. So and this sort of thing is super valuable to be able to go to an adult, even a teacher, when you notice something like, oh, you look like you're really doing something that you enjoy doing. If you could just tell them, maybe write them a note. Can be cards are really powerful in this way, sending somebody a note. I still remember, one of my principals at a school I worked at sent me a note that basically was like, hey, I think you're doing a great job. And she mentioned something about something she saw in my classroom, and it really stuck with me. So I think that more of that would really change the culture of a student body. If as a student body, you started finding ways to support and be affirmative, give positive reinforcement to the people around you. It doesn't take much.
Thanks so much. Our next question is from Corey in the 8th grade, who is zooming in from home.
Good morning. My name is Corey, and I noticed that in your bio that you are a co-founder and former CEO of a company that makes 3D printers. I think the possibility of being able to print out 3D items is fascinating, and I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit about the process of 3D printers and how they work.
Thank you, Corey. Before we started MakerBot, we had this, we wanted to make a machine that could make other machines, right? The idea was actually we wanted to make a machine that could make copies of itself. So that in effect, and our goal was to end money. We wanted to make a machine that would allow you to make anything, including other versions of itself. And the idea was, a very Marxist idea of, put the means of production, take it from the privileged and the people who have capital and the people who own factories and put them in individual hands, including students. So if we can do that and meet everybody's needs collectively by making things rather than buying things, then money becomes irrelevant and we become a much more sharing and supportive culture. Now that's a pretty ambitious, idealistic, utopian sort of vision, right? Like that kind of sounds a little crazy when I say it out loud. But that was where the initial idea came. That's what sort of that was what kept us going and kept us staying up late and working, 12 to 16-hour days for those first couple of years of the company. In terms of 3D printing, I think it's an interesting moment because in many ways, when we started out, I'd have a 3D printer and I'd take it on the subway to go have a meeting, and people would be like, "What is that?" Just strangers would ask me, and I'd just mess with them, and I'd be like, "It's a time machine." And they'd be like, really? How? And I'd be like, no, that's a joke. But people didn't know what a 3D printer was. So I'd say it's a 3D printer, and they'd give me the same look as they did when I told them it was a time machine. So now it's it's relatively normal. A lot of schools have 3D printers. A lot of, there's probably families that have them. When we started, we were really proud that we could make a 3D printer for $2,000. Now you can go on Amazon.com and buy a printer that's perfectly good for like $220. So the prices, when we started, 3D printers were $100,000 and we made them $2,000, and now they're $200. So they're much more accessible and normal now. I think the thing that's exciting about it is if you have an idea, you can download Fusion 360 or any number of different sort of design programs and sort of sketch something up and make it and see if you like it. I think that's the most exciting thing that it does.
Thank you so much, Bre. And we want to be mindful of your time this morning. Do you have time for 2 more questions?
Yeah.
Beautiful. All right, we're going next to Sori, who has a question about the current pandemic.
Hi, good morning. And I learned that your company, Bantam Tools, donated machines to design ventilators and face shields during the COVID-19 pandemic. And my question for you is, how do you think technology will help our society overcome the challenges of this pandemic?
Sorry, that's a good question. I mean, I think that I think in general humans are pretty lazy, and we don't really necessarily do things until we have to do them. And I think we're in a state with COVID where we have to do things. You know, I was one of my friends is an expert on viruses and vaccines, and he was just saying the other day that basically like usually it takes like 10 years to develop a vaccine. And he was explaining, and we've been able to. There's a couple companies that have been able to really get a vaccine and start to work one out fast. And I love vaccines. I don't want to be sick. I love the idea that I can get an injection and it will keep me from being sick on something. I went to the doctor and basically said, whenever a new vaccine comes out, give it to me. And they were like, you are really special. Most people don't like getting injected, like needles. And I was like, I hate needles. I actually can't watch. I like it. It makes me, I don't like it, but I do want to be vaccinated. So he said that it usually takes 10 years because there's so much bureaucracy. They have to fundraise, they have to get started, they get sidetracked, they have regulatory issues. I think it's really pretty awesome that that are the sort of the companies that are pulling this together to find a vaccine are doing it so fast. So I think that's really exciting. I think the other thing that's hard is that as humans, we naturally want to be around other humans. It's really hard for us to isolate. And, there's some like, somebody basically made a thing that basically said, if you're in a group of 10 people, they've got the number of people that have COVID in a location, and they can calculate the likelihood that if you get together with 10 people is what the likelihood is that somebody will have COVID in that group, and then therefore infect that community, that group. And it's high. It's like in New York, it's like 8%. In Westchester County, where I'm at, it's like 10%. It's more. So the idea is, but at the same time, we all want to see our extended family. So like, I think we're actually at this moment where there's a lot that technology can do, but I think our biggest challenge is our humanity and our natural human urges to want to be together. So technology is not going to fix that. At the same time, I think that it's just I would say, it's an interesting time because so many businesses are going to fail and there's so much opportunity. So anytime that there's a big transition in our society, like from before computers to having computers, like before telephones to having telephones, like before TV to after having TV in our society, this has all happened in the last 100 years. Before cars to having cars. Anytime there's a big change in technology in our society, a lot of jobs go away. I mean, there used to be an immense amount of people hired to type on typewriters, and there aren't typewriters around anymore. So all those jobs go away. We have to think like, okay, at some point in the future, humans aren't going to drive cars. So who are the taxi drivers and the bus drivers and truck drivers going to be? They're going to be computers. What are going to happen to the people who are planning to be truck drivers for the next 30 years, right? So with any change, it's worth looking and sort of zooming out and being like, okay, everything's changing. And I think COVID is one of these things. What are the things that are going to be successful in a COVID world and a post-COVID world? So for example, like Zoom, what we're on now, this technology was not easy. Before COVID, I was on Google meetings and Google Hangouts, and maybe a third of the time they would crash. And if you had more than 10 people, they would crash. And now because of COVID, there's 130 people here because it has to work, because we're in a time where that's important. So there's a lot of people, and that company is doing very well. It was not doing as well as it was before COVID as it is after COVID. So so that's more saying like how to be a business during COVID and think about it. But I think that how can technology help during COVID? I think it's actually, we have to get past our humanity and sort of tame our human instincts to really, we could make COVID a thing if we, not a thing, it could go away if we decided as a society that we were all going to stay home for 6 weeks. How would we do that? People wouldn't be able to work. A lot of people need to work to make money. We'd have to collectively decide that we're going to, you know, pay people to stay at home so that they can, and then we're going to have to pay people to cook their own food. And there's a lot of people who aren't good cooks and who live alone and are used to eating out. So then we're going to have to figure out how to teach them how to cook at home. And a lot of people don't know how to do that. So we have to figure that out. And then we have to figure out, like, how do we make it so people aren't lonely, so they don't start going out and seeing people secretly because they just miss people. So we can talk about this all day long, but I think I think if you're interested in engaging in that question, it's worth taking one piece of it and working on it and trying to do something and work with a team of friends to really explore the idea.
Okay, and our final question is from Geraldine, who is zooming in from home as well.
Hi, good morning. I would like to thank you for being our whole school time speaker today. In your bio, it says you were a teacher from 1999 to 2006. So my question for you is, how do you think the education system has changed since you left the profession? Has it been a positive shift?
So I still have to talk about meditation. So I'm going to tack that on to the end of this question. So the question is, like, what's changed since I was a teacher? I think the biggest change is that young people aren't as reliant on old people to get what they need. I think that's the most powerful shift that's happened in the last 20 years. You know, when I was growing up and when I was a teacher, you know, even 10 years ago, kids your age 10 years ago were dependent on adults to get them what they needed. You aren't. You don't have to wait for somebody to take you to the library to get a book. You can just go figure something out. You don't have to wait. You don't have to hire somebody to, you know, if you want to learn guitar, you don't have to hire a teacher to teach you. You can go and watch those lessons for free online. It's really powerful. I think that that's the biggest change. And probably the best change is not so much that the educational system has gotten better in any way, but that young people don't need the educational system to explore who they are, discover themselves, and try things out and explore their passions. To me, that's so powerful and gives me so much optimism. Now, it would be nice to be able to say, like, oh, I wish the system did more stuff for students and give more. I don't think we can depend on the system. I think you all are really lucky to be in a school where you have adults who care about you. At least, hopefully there's at least one adult at your school that you can relate to. Based on my experience as a teacher, if you have one teacher that you like and connect with, you're winning. That's great. If you have more than one, you're in a dream school. If you don't have one, it's worth picking the one that you like, that you dislike the least, and trying to make a connection with them and saying, you know, and you can literally tell them, like, I'm not really into school, but I dislike your class the least. Thank you. And I think that that's probably the you know, figuring out what you like is probably the best part about being a student these days, is you don't have to be dependent on adults.
Thank you so much, Bre. And yes, we are going to end with meditation. So before we do, feel free.
Yeah. So one of the things that I'm really pleased about is that you had your meditation at the beginning. So I've had, you know, I can say that I'm jealous because I didn't come to meditation until I was much older, and it gave me a superpower. And the superpower it gave me is when I'm still and I'm meditating and I'm feeling my body, I'm becoming more aware of how my body feels. And when I was running a company, and since then, when I've had to make decisions, you know, most people think that our decisions are made somewhere in our brain, but a good chunk of decisions you can feel in your body. A lot of people call this like the feeling, you know, what does your gut say? What, and you know, in reality, your nervous system is an instrument, and it gives you information. And so I think that one of the things that I'm really pleased about that you're doing meditation is that gives you the ability, when you're faced with a decision, you could just react in kind of react, which is not always the best idea. But you now have, as people who have had a chance to learn how to meditate, you have a moment to take a minute to reflect and feel how your body feels. And your body will give you information as to which direction to go. Sometimes it'll say neither of these things are a good option. This one is the least worst. Sometimes it'll be really clear, like, oh, this one really sparkles. I feel that momentum towards that decision. And I just want to encourage you to trust your body and use the meditation, use meditation when you're in tough times or decision-making times to get in touch with your body and trust it. So I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you so much for that. And thank you so much for sharing your morning with us. We're so grateful for your time. We're going to go straight to meditation, which is perfect, with Tracy. And then Ivan will share some final remarks.
1, 2, 3. One, two, three.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tracy. And also, thank you, Devin. You promised that Mr. Pettis would be a wonderful and creative and dynamic speaker. And once again, you delivered. And Bre, what a pleasure it was to listen to you and to see you interact with our students. In our mission, I think the heart of our mission, we talk about our responsibility is to teach children to adapt, to change, and to create and share lives of deep meaning, dynamic virtue, and transcendent joy. And in so many ways, you embody the heart of what we're trying to do here. Your life's course, the way you've been able to build upon suffering and struggle and these ancient virtues of courage and bravery and compassion that you manifest in technological ways is really inspiring and gives us hope in the future. And I'm really, really grateful that you were our speaker before we move in on Thanksgiving break. And we will keep you in our hearts and minds in this time off. And I hope you see it yourself as a member of our community. Thank you so much. And any final words? Thank you so much again for also finishing up with talking about the value of meditation.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me. It's inspiring to get to meet and interact with the next generation. I look, when you're done with school, whether it's high school or college, and if you have an interest, look up Bantam Tools and apply for a job. Would love to hire some of you at that time, if you're interested. And I wish you all the best. Trust yourselves, believe in yourselves, explore your passions and possibilities. Follow the things, follow the things that inspire you and sparkle and unlock your potential. I wish you the best.
Thank you so much. Happy holidays. Take care.